The square was filled with silence, a silence heavy and cruel, as if even the air was holding its breath. Hundreds of eyes stared at the center where a young alien girl was forced to her knees. Chains clinked around her wrists, sharp metal cutting into her delicate skin. Her breaths came fast and uneven, her chest rising and falling with fear. She did not understand why she was here. She had committed no crime. She had harmed no one. Yet the guards dragged her forward as if she were the greatest criminal of their age. The ground before her was covered with long metal spears, their tips sharpened until they gleamed in the pale light. The cruel floor was designed not for walking, not for sitting, but for punishment alone. Anyone placed upon it would bleed with every movement. The guards pulled her closer, ignoring her weak cries. With one push, they forced her down. The girl screamed as the points dug into her skin. Pain spread through her body like fire. Blood trickled down her arms and legs, staining the metal beneath her. The crowd flinched, but no one moved to stop it. The council of elders sat on high seats above the square. Their faces were cold, their eyes empty. The leader raised his hand and spoke loudly so that all could hear. For her disobedience, she will sit on the bed of spears until the blood washes away her sins. His words echoed across the silent city, but the girl knew, and many others knew, that she had done nothing wrong. Her only crime was refusing the advances of a powerful noble. Yet here she was, condemned before all, her voice silenced, her pain displayed like entertainment. The alien citizens in the crowd whispered among themselves. Some pitied her, some feared for her, but none dared to speak against the council. Their world had been ruled by fear for too long. The punishment floor had taken many lives, and everyone knew that standing against the council only added another name to the list of victims. So they stood in silence, eyes lowered, pretending not to see. The girl's cries echoed, and each cry stabbed deeper than the spears themselves. Her body shook violently. Each time she moved to ease the pain, another spear tore her skin. Breath turned into sobs, her tears mixing with blood. She tried to beg, but the guards struck her to keep her quiet. The humiliation was worse than the pain. She had been a free soul, innocent and kind, but now she was reduced to a display. Lesson for the people. Obey, the council's silence screamed, or this will be your fate. High above, the noble who accused her smirked in satisfaction. He leaned back in his seat, confident that no one would ever dare challenge his word. He believed the punishment would break her spirit and remind others of his power. But far in the crowd, someone else was watching, and his eyes did not turn away. A human stood at the edge of the square, arms folded, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Unlike the others, he did not lower his gaze. He watched every moment, every strike, every cry. His jaw tightened as the girl's body shivered on the cruel floor. He could see that she was innocent. He could see that this was not justice, but pure cruelty. His hands curled into fists, and his heart pounded in his chest, yet he remained silent, waiting, watching, studying the cruelty of this world. The girl tried to lift her head. Through blurred vision, her eyes searched the crowd, desperate for a friendly face, for someone who would step forward and say the truth, that she was not guilty. But no one came.
Only silence.
Only fear. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why me? What did I do?" Her words were lost in the noise of her own sobs. Hours seemed to pass, though only minutes had gone by. Every second on the spear-covered floor felt like a lifetime of agony. Her clothes were torn, her skin pierced. She tried to remain strong, to show them she would not break, but the pain was too much. Her screams broke into the night air, and still the council did not move. The human clenched his jaw harder. He had seen wars, he had seen death, but what he saw now was something different. It was not battle, not survival, but cruelty born from arrogance and pride. He could not yet act, not with guards watching every movement, but the fire in his chest grew stronger with every cry from the girl. The noble laughed softly, sipping his drink as if enjoying a show. The council leader announced again, "She will remain until the moon sets." The people shivered. No one had ever survived that long. The spears would tear her body apart before the night was half over. She would die slowly, painfully, and the council would call it justice. But far away in the crowd, the human's eyes burned with anger. He whispered to himself, "This ends tonight." His voice was low, carried only by the wind, but there was strength in it, strength that no council could command, no guards could suppress. The girl closed her eyes, her body weak and trembling. She thought no one cared, that she was truly alone in this cruel world. But she did not see the figure standing in the shadows, ready to step into the light, and when he did, nothing in that world would remain the same. The square was drowning in silence, the girl's cries mixing with the sound of her blood dripping onto the sharp metal floor. The council watched from their high seats, their faces proud and cold. The noble who had accused her smirked, enjoying every moment of her suffering. For him, this was not punishment, it was entertainment. The guards stood in perfect lines, their weapons ready, their eyes empty of mercy. But in the far corner of the crowd, one figure refused to bow his head. A human, wrapped in a worn cloak, stood still, his eyes fixed on the girl's trembling form. He had been silent until now, just another shadow among the hundreds. But his heart was burning hotter with every scream that tore from her throat. The girl's breath came in gasps, her voice broken. She tried to push herself up, but fell back onto the spears, and a fresh cry of pain cut through the night. Her body was shaking, her skin pale, her blood dark against the cruel floor. She searched the crowd again, eyes wide with desperation, but all she saw were faces looking away. All except one. Her gaze met his. For a moment the pain faded. In the middle of that endless sea of silence, she found eyes that did not look away. Eyes filled not with fear, but with anger, with defiance. She did not know who he was, only that he was different. Her lips trembled as she whispered a word only she could hear. "Help." And then he moved. The crowd gasped as the human stepped forward, breaking the invisible line no one dared to cross. Every head turned, whispers rushing through the air. No outsider had ever interrupted a council punishment. The guards tensed, their weapons lifting slightly, but the human did not stop. He pushed through the crowd with steady steps, his cloak brushing against the stone floor. The council leader raised his hand, his voice sharp. "Halt! Who dares interrupt this trial?" The human's voice rang out, strong and unshaken. "This is no trial. This is cruelty." Gasps spread like fire through the crowd. Some covered their mouths, others took a step back in fear. No one had ever spoken against the council so openly. The noble leaned forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "Do you dare challenge our law, human? Leave at once, or share her fate." But the human did not move. He stood taller, his eyes locked on the suffering girl. His fists clenched at his sides, and his voice carried through the square. "Without truth is not lit, is only chains for the weak." The girl's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken for her, not since the day her punishment began. The sound of his voice was like a flame in the darkness. She felt tears roll down her cheeks, but this time they were not only from pain, they were from hope. The guards began to march toward him, their weapons gleaming under the cold light. The crowd backed away, afraid of what would come next. Yet the human did not retreat. He stepped closer to the girl, his shadow falling over her bleeding form, placed himself between her and the council, between her and death itself. The council leader narrowed his eyes. "You cannot stop this, human. This is our law. She has been judged, and she will suffer until her last breath. If you stand in her way, you will die beside her." The human raised his chin, his eyes sharp and fearless. "Then so be it," he said, his voice steady. "Better to die for justice than live in silence." A storm of whispers swept the crowd. Fear battled with something else, something long buried. Some looked at the human with pity, believing he was throwing his life away. Others looked at him with awe, as if a spark had been lit in their hearts. They had lived under the council's rule for generations, too afraid to speak, too afraid to act. But this man, this outsider, stood without fear. The guards closed in, forming a ring around him, spears pointed at his chest, blades ready to cut him down. Still, The human did not flinch. His eyes stayed on the girl, and his voice softened only for her. "You are not alone anymore," he said. The girl's lips parted, a weak sob escaping her throat. She wanted to believe him, but the spears beneath her reminded her of the cruelty of this world. She was too weak to rise, too broken to fight, yet his words planted something inside her, something she thought she had lost forever. The noble slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair. "Enough of this madness. Kill him." The order rang out, and the guards raised their weapons. "Hi!" The crowd gasped again, mothers pulling their children close, old men covering their eyes, not wanting to watch what would happen next. But the human smiled, just a faint smile, calm and unshaken. His cloak slid from his shoulders, revealing scars across his arms, marks of battles long past. He had not come unprepared. He had faced death before, and he was ready to face it again. The girl, through blurred eyes, saw the scars and realized this. Man was no ordinary traveler. He was a fighter, someone who had survived battles harsher than anything she could imagine. The first guard lunged forward, spear thrust toward the human's chest. The crowd cried out, but the human moved like lightning. His hand shot up, grabbing the shaft of the spear before it could strike. With one powerful twist, he broke it in half. The sound of snapping metal rang out across the square. Gasps turned into shouts. The guards froze in shock. The council leader's eyes widened in disbelief, and the girl, still trembling on the cruel floor, felt her heart leap for the first time. In days, hope was no longer a dream. It stood before her, alive, defiant, and unstoppable. The human's voice thundered once more, "This ends now." The square was alive with noise now. What had begun as silence filled with fear was breaking into gasps and murmurs. The human had shattered a guard's spear with his bare hands, and that single act shook the council's illusion of control. The people had never seen such defiance before. For years, the council ruled through terror. But this stranger had stepped forward and dared to break their law in front of everyone. The council leader's face twisted with rage. His voice rose, echoing over the square. "Seize him. Break him as an example to all who dare challenge the council." Dozens of guards moved at once, their boots pounding against the stone ground. Spears, swords, and whips glinted under the light as they surrounded the human. The circle grew tighter, a cage of blades meant to crush his spirit. The noble who had condemned the girl leaned forward, his lips curling into a cruel smile. He believed the fight would be short, that this foolish outsider would be cut down within moments. But the human did not step back. He stood tall, calm, his eyes burning with purpose. His voice cut through the noise. "You call this justice? You call this law? No, this is tyranny." The crowd stirred uneasily. They had thought the human would be begging for his life by now. Instead, his words carried a fire that shook their hearts. Many lowered their heads, afraid to show their emotions, but deep inside, something was waking. The girl sat bleeding on the spear-covered floor, her body trembling, but her eyes never left him. She could hardly breathe, her vision blurring, yet each word he spoke reached her soul. He was not fighting only for himself, he was fighting for her. The first guard lunged, swinging a heavy blade. The human stepped aside with speed born of countless battles, catching the guard's arm and twisting it until the sword clattered to the ground. With a single strike, he knocked the man unconscious. Another guard rushed in from behind, but the human spun, his fist slamming into the soldier's chest with enough force to send him crashing to the ground. Gasps rose from the crowd. The impossible was happening. One man was standing against the power of an entire council, and he was winning. The council leader's voice thundered again. "Do not hold back. Kill him where he stands." More guards advanced. Their formation tightened, spears stabbing from every side. The human moved like a storm, dodging, striking, breaking their weapons. Every time a spear splintered in his hands, the crowd roared louder in shock. The noble's smile faded. Fear crept into his eyes as he realized this was no ordinary man. This human fought with strength and skill that none of their soldiers could match. Still, The council leader tried to maintain control. He stood tall, his robe flowing, his voice sharp like a whip. You are one man, human. You cannot fight an empire. When you fall, your defiance will die with you. The human turned his gaze toward him, his expression cold and unshaken. Empires fall when they build themselves on cruelty. You mistake fear for respect, but fear is weak, and today you will see it break. Those words spread through the square like wildfire. The citizens, long trapped in silence, lifted their eyes again. Mothers, fathers, children all, watching this one man defy the council, their hearts beat faster. For the first time they wondered if the council was not untouchable. The guards pressed harder, their weapons cutting across the human's cloak. Blood trickled from his arm where a blade had grazed him, but he did not slow. His fists struck with power, his movements precise, as if every step had already been measured. One soldier after another fell, groaning on the ground. The girl gasped through her pain. She had thought she would die in silence, forgotten, but now she was witnessing something no one could have imagined. Her tears fell not only from pain, but from the overwhelming sight of hope being born in front of her. The council leader's fury grew. He slammed his staff into the ground. Enough, archers, aim. From the walls above, soldiers raised crossbows, their arrows glinting. The crowd screamed in fear. The human stood in the center, surrounded by fallen guards, his chest rising. And falling with heavy breaths, the girl's heart sank. Against blades he had proven himself. But against a rain of arrows, how could anyone survive? The human looked up, his jaw tight. He knew what was coming, but his eyes showed no fear. Instead, he spread his arms slightly, placing himself directly in front of the girl. Using his own body as her shield, whispers ran through the people. He is protecting her. He would rather die than leave her. The council leader smirked, believing the moment belonged to him once again. It's foolish human. You cannot fight the sky itself. Fire. The order rang out. The archers drew their strings back, the sound of creaking wood filling the air. The girl let out a weak cry, reaching toward the man who stood between her and death. But the human's voice rang louder than the council's order. If I fall today, then remember this moment. Remember that one stood against your chains. And if one can stand, so can all of you. The crowd erupted in shouts. Fear twisted into something stronger, anger. The people had lived too long under the shadow of fear, but now they saw the truth with their own eyes. The archers hesitated, their hands trembling. Some lowered their bows slightly, torn between obedience and the growing fire in their hearts. The council leader screamed at them to obey, but the human's words had already begun to unravel the chains of silence. The girl's eyes widened. For the first time, she felt that this fight was no longer only about her. It was about every soul in that city who had been forced into silence, and the human stood there, unshaken, daring the arrows to fly, daring the council to test the strength of a man who carried justice in his hands. The clash between one man and an empire had only just begun. The order to fire still hung in the air, but the archers on the walls hesitated. Their fingers trembled on the strings of their bows. For the first time in years, the power of the council was not absolute. The human's voice, filled with defiance, had struck something deep in their hearts. Some of them lowered their weapons slightly, uncertain whether they could send arrows into the body of a man who stood for justice. The council leader's face twisted in fury. His staff slammed against the stone floor. Cowards. Fire now, he roared. His voice shook the square, but the human's calm gaze was stronger. He stood tall in front of the girl, spreading his arms slightly, daring them to strike him down. And then the chaos began. The first archer loosed an arrow, but the human moved like lightning. His hand shot out, seizing the shaft in midair before it reached him. The crowd gasped. In one smooth motion, he snapped the arrow in two and dropped it at his feet. Another arrow flew, but he twisted aside, letting it shatter against the stone. His movements were fast, precise. Like a man who had trained all his life for battles greater than this one. The people cried out, some in fear, others in awe. They had never seen such skill, never imagined one man could defy an army. The girl, bleeding and weak, watched with wide eyes. Each arrow he stopped, each guard he pushed aside, gave her a strength she thought she no longer had. The archers faltered. Their arms grew heavy, their aim uncertain. Whispers rose among them. Some dared to ask if this was right, if this was justice. But the council leader screamed again, his command filled with rage. Kill him, or face the punishment floor yourselves. Fear. Push them to fire again, but the human no longer fought only with his hands. He moved toward the walls, dodging arrows and pulling fallen weapons from the ground. With a single throw, he sent a broken spear spinning into the air, striking the bow of one archer and knocking it from his grasp. Another strike disarmed a second soldier. In moments, the rain of arrows slowed. The guards on the ground tried to overwhelm him, but the human met them head-on. His fists struck like hammers. His kicks sent warriors sprawling. Sword slashed across his side, blood staining his cloak, yet he did not stop. He fought with the strength of someone who carried not just his own will, but the hope of another life, the life of the girl behind him. The crowd could no longer stay silent. Shouts rose, voices breaking through years of fear. "Stop this madness!" One cried. "He is right," shouted another. The voices grew louder, stronger, until they were no longer whispers, but a roar that filled the square. The council members shifted uneasily in their seats. They had ruled through silence, but silence was breaking before their eyes. The noble who had condemned the girl clenched his jaw, his confidence fading as the human refused to fall. The girl tried to rise, her body shaking with pain. Every movement sent fresh agony through her, but she wanted to see, wanted to bear witness. To the man who fought for her life, her hands trembled as she lifted herself slightly, her eyes fixed on him. The human noticed her struggle. For a moment, their eyes met again. In her gaze, he saw not only pain, but courage, the courage he had given her. And with that, his strikes grew even fiercer. He knocked one guard into another, sending them both crashing to the ground. He tore a shield from the hands of another soldier and raised it, blocking a rain of arrows meant for the girl. The people roared with every strike. What had once been a trial meant to show the council's strength was turning into a battle that revealed their weakness. The guards, though many, began to falter. Their numbers could not overcome the will of one man who refused to yield. The council leader's voice cracked with desperation. "End this. Kill the girl if you must, but stop him." The words struck the square like a thunderbolt. The crowd gasped, "Kill the girl." Even those who had remained silent could not hide their horror now. The punishment floor was cruel, but it was still presented as law. This, however, was open murder, ordered before the eyes of the people, the humans. Rage flared. His voice thundered across the square. "You reveal your true face at last. You do not seek justice. You seek control through fear. But today that fear dies." With a roar, he charged forward. His shield slammed into the nearest line of guards, scattering them like broken dolls. His fists struck with the force of a storm, breaking weapons, breaking courage. The ground was littered with fallen soldiers. The people surged closer, no longer silent, no longer afraid. They shouted in unison, their voices rising higher with every blow he landed. "Justice. Justice." The girl's tears fell freely now. Not of despair, but of something far greater hope. She clutched her chest, whispering through trembling lips, "Please don't fall. You're my only light." The human raised his broken spear high, his voice carrying above the chaos. "No chains will hold her, not while I stand." The crowd erupted. The council, for the first time, looked uncertain. The noble who had once smirked now looked pale. The tide was shifting, and they could feel it. The fight for justice was no longer his alone. His defiance had lit a fire in the hearts of the people, and once a fire begins to spread, no council can ever put it out. The square was no longer silent. The air was alive with the sound of voices rising, shouting for justice, shouting for freedom. The people who had once bowed their heads in silence now lifted their voices. The human's defiance had broken the invisible chains that had held them for so long. The guards were scattered on the ground, some groaning in pain, others crawling back in fear. The human stood tall in the center, his chest heaving, blood dripping from cuts across his arms. Yet, his presence was stronger than ever. He had become a living symbol of defiance, a flame that could not be put out. The girl still sat on the spear-covered floor, trembling and weak, but hope shone in her eyes. Her body ached, every breath burned, but her spirit was no longer broken. She looked around the square and saw something she thought she would never witness: the people standing. The people refusing to stay silent. The council leader slammed his staff on the floor, his voice sharp and filled with rage. Silence. All of you, silence at once. But the people did not obey. Their voices grew louder, stronger, a tide that could not be stopped. Mothers lifted their children onto their shoulders so they could see. Old men who had lived their whole lives in fear clenched their fists, their eyes shining. The human had shown them the truth. Fear was only as strong as their silence. The noble who had condemned the girl turned pale. His smirk was gone, replaced by panic. He whispered to the council leader, "This is dangerous. If they rise against us, we lose everything." The leader glared at him, but for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. His power had always rested on control, but control was slipping away. The human raised his voice, carrying it across the square. "You have lived too long under chains, too long under fear. Look around you. Look at this girl, innocent, yet punished for nothing but the pride of one man. And you watched in silence because fear told you to, but fear is a lie. Together, you are stronger than any council." The people roared in agreement. Their voices shook the walls of the square. The guards, still standing, hesitated. Some raised their weapons again, but their hands shook. They looked at the crowd, at the human, and doubt spread among them. Were they truly fighting for justice, or just serving the cruelty of those above them? One guard dropped his spear. The sound of metal striking stone echoed like thunder. Another followed, then another, until the ground was littered with fallen weapons. The people shouted louder, their courage rising with every guard who stepped back. The council leader's face turned red with fury. "Traitors, all of you. You will regret this." But his voice no longer carried the same weight. The people no longer bowed their heads. The fire in their hearts burned too brightly now. The girl pressed her hands to the spears beneath her, forcing herself to rise. Pain shot through her body, blood staining her torn clothes, but she refused to remain on the ground any longer. Trembling legs, she stood, swaying but unbroken. The crowd gasped at the sight. The human rushed to her side, steadying her gently. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and strength. "I thought I was alone," she whispered weakly. "You never were," he answered firmly. "You only needed someone to stand first." The people erupted again, their voices thundering across the square. "Free her! Free her!" The noble stumbled backward, fear twisting his face. He pointed at the girl, his voice desperate. "She is guilty. She defied me." But his words were drowned out by the roar of the people. They no longer cared for his lies. They had seen the truth. The council leader tried to command order, but his voice was lost in the storm of rebellion. He turned to his guards, but half of them had already stepped back, refusing to fight any longer. The power that had ruled for generations was crumbling before his eyes. The human lifted the girl gently into his arms, careful not to press against her wounds. He raised his voice once more, louder than the council, louder than the nobles. "Cries, her chains are broken. Your chains are broken. You are free if you choose to be." The words struck deep. The people shouted as one, their voices no longer whispers of fear but a chorus of freedom. For the first time in years, the square belonged not to the council, but to the people themselves. The noble fell to his knees, his voice shaking. "Please stop this. I only did what I thought was right," but the crowd answered with anger. They had suffered too long under his pride, too long under the council's cruelty. The fear that once bound them was shattered. The girl, though weak, raised her head high in the human's arms. She spoke softly, but her voice carried through. "The square? No more silence. No more fear. The people cheered wildly, their voices echoing into the night sky. The council leader stepped back, his authority slipping away with every heartbeat. He realized now that no threat, no punishment could return the silence that had been broken. The human stood in the center of it all, the girl safe in his arms, the people rising behind him. He had not only saved her life, he had given the entire city something they thought they had lost forever. He had given them freedom. And once freedom takes root, no power can ever bury it again. The square shook with the voices of the people. For the first time in generations, they were not silent. They were shouting, demanding freedom, demanding justice. The guards had thrown down their weapons, the noble had lost his power, and the girl was no longer just a victim. She was the symbol of their courage. But the council leader was not ready to let go. His face was red with fury, his hands trembling as he clutched his staff. His voice rose above the roar of the people. You dare defy the council? You think one man and a broken girl can undo centuries of rule? No, this ends with their deaths. He raised his staff high, and from the shadows of the hall behind him, a new figure stepped forward. The crowd gasped as a towering warrior emerged, clad in black armor, carrying a massive blade that glowed with a cruel light. This was no ordinary guard. This was the council's executioner, a soldier trained only for killing, a monster unleashed only in times of great rebellion. Fear rippled through the crowd. Some voices faltered, some heads lowered again. People had risen, but now they saw the council's final weapon, a reminder of the power that had crushed countless uprisings before. The girl shivered in the human's arms, her body weak, but her spirit burning. She whispered, "You cannot fight him. He is not like the others." The human looked at her with steady eyes. His voice was calm, strong, unshaken. "I have fought worse. I will not fall, not while you live, not while they watch." He lowered her gently to the ground, resting her against the broken chains of the punishment floor. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she felt the strength in his touch. "Stay strong. When this ends, you will rise free." The executioner marched forward, each step heavy, each strike of his boots shaking the stone. The blade gleamed under the pale light. A weapon that had tasted the lives of many before. The council leader smiled again, his confidence returning. "Strike him down," he commanded, "and remind them all who rules this world." The people fell silent once more, their hope trembling. They had seen the human defeat guards, even archers, but this warrior was something else. It was taller, stronger, trained only to kill. The air grew heavy, and even the night itself seemed to wait for the clash to begin. The human stepped forward, his cloak torn, his body bleeding, but his spirit unbroken, faced the executioner without fear. His fists clenched, his chest rose. With steady breaths, his eyes locked on his enemy. The clash began. The executioner swung his massive blade with a roar, stroke strong enough to shatter stone. The human rolled aside, the blade smashing into the ground where he had stood. Dust and sparks filled the air. The people cried out, but the human was already moving, his fists slamming into the warrior's side. The armor shook but held. Executioner barely flinched, raising his blade again. The human dodged, struck again, his movements fast, his attacks sharp, but the armor absorbed much of the force. The girl's heart pounded as she watched, whispering weakly, "Please, survive." The executioner pressed harder, his blade cutting through the air with deadly force. The human blocked with a fallen shield, sparks flying with every strike. The crowd gasped at each clash, the sound echoing like thunder. The human's arms bled from the force of the blows, his body pushed to its limit. Yet his eyes never wavered. The council leader laughed cruelly. "You see, even the strongest outsider cannot stand against our will. He will fall, and so will your hope." But the human's voice cut through the laughter. "You are wrong, guide. Do not fight alone." He glanced at the crowd, and their voices rose again, louder than before. "Justice! Justice!" they shouted. The chant spread like fire, filling every corner of the square. The people's voices became his strength. The executioner roared and swung again. But this time the human caught the blade with both hands. Blood ran down his palms as the sharp edges cut into his skin, yet he held firm. The crowd screamed, watching him resist the impossible. The cry of defiance, he twisted, forcing the blade away, then struck with all his strength. His fist slammed into the warrior's helmet, cracking it open. The executioner stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. The people roared, their voices shaking the walls. The human pressed forward, blow after blow, until the massive warrior dropped to his knees. With one final strike, the human tore the blade from his hands and sent him crashing to the ground. Defeated, the square erupted in cheers. The sound was so powerful it drowned out the council leader's screams. The people had witnessed the impossible. The human had stood against their strongest weapon and won. The girl's tears flowed as she whispered, He saved me. Saved all of us. The human turned to face the council leader, holding the massive blade now in his hands. His voice rang across the square. Your rule ends tonight. You cannot command silence anymore. The people have found their voice, and no blade, no punishment will silence them again. The crowd thundered in agreement, their chants shaking the earth. The guards who remained dropped their weapons completely, bowing their heads not to the council, but to the man who had fought for justice. The council leader's face twisted in fear. He stepped back, his staff trembling in his grip. For the first time in his life, he realized he was powerless. The people no longer feared him. His words no longer held weight. His empire of silence had crumbled. The human walked back to the girl and lifted her gently into his arms again. The people cheered louder, their voices echoing into the night sky. The council's final weapon had fallen, and the chains of fear were shattered forever. This was the final stand, and it was the human who stood victorious. The night that began with silence and cruelty had now become a storm of voices. The square that once echoed with the screams of a helpless girl now thundered with chants of freedom. The human stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, the girl safe in his arms, and the people united around them. The council leader stumbled backward, his staff shaking in his hand. His once proud face was pale, his eyes filled with fear. He shouted at the crowd, but his voice was lost beneath their roar. His commands no longer carried weight. His power, built on silence and fear, had shattered. The noble who had condemned the girl crawled across the floor, begging for protection. Please, forgive me. I only followed the council's orders, but the people had seen the truth. They knew his lies, his cruelty, his arrogance. The voices rose against him, louder than ever. The human raised one hand, and slowly the crowd grew quiet. His voice carried strength even in his exhaustion. You no longer need to bow. You no longer need to suffer. The chains that bound you were never stronger than your will. Tonight, you broke them. The people listened, their eyes shining with something new hope. Many had lived their entire lives under the weight of fear. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. They were feeling it for the first time, and it burned in their hearts like fire. The girl stirred weakly in his arms. Her voice was soft, but it carried far. You saved me, but you saved them too. Her words spread through the square like light breaking the dark. The crowd cheered again, their voices shaking the night sky. The human looked at her gently. I did not save you alone. They saved you too. Because without their voices, without their courage, this would not have ended. The people answered with another roar of agreement. The guards who had once served the council bowed their heads, ashamed of their silence. Some fell to their knees, pledging themselves not to power, but to justice. The council leader, trembling, tried to flee, but the people blocked his path. For years he had commanded them with fear. Now they stood taller, stronger, refusing to let him escape the judgment he had denied others. His staff slipped from his hands, clattering against the stone. The human turned toward him, his voice calm but sharp. Your rule is over. You fed on fear, and now fear has left you. You will answer for every life you destroyed, leaders. Knees buckled, and he collapsed, the weight of his crimes pressing harder than any chain. The girl raised her hand weakly toward the crowd. Her body was broken, but her spirit was blazing. Do not let this fire fade. Do not return to silence. Tonight, you found your strength. Hold it. Protect it. The crowd erupted again. Men and women shouted together. Children raised their voices, and the city itself seemed to breathe again. The square that had been a stage for cruelty was now a place of rebirth. The human lifted the girl carefully, carrying her away from the spear-covered floor. The people parted before him, bowing not in fear, but in respect. Some reached out to touch his cloak. Others knelt as he passed, but his gaze stayed forward. He was not seeking worship, only freedom for those who had forgotten. And at the edge of the square, he laid the girl down gently on soft cloth brought by the people. He cleaned her wounds with water, his hands careful, his eyes steady. She looked at him, her lips trembling. Why? Why risk your life for me? He paused, then smiled softly. Because no one deserves to suffer for no crime. And because sometimes all it takes is one person to remind the world of what is right. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not of pain. They were of gratitude, of trust, the future she thought she would never see. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the city in gold. The people turned toward the light, their voices still strong, their spirits alive. First time in years, rising sun did not shine on a city of silence. It shone on a city that had found its voice. The human stood with the girl beside him, looking out over the crowd. His body bore scars of battle, his cloak torn, but his spirit burned brighter than the dawn itself. The girl whispered, her voice steady now. This day will be remembered, nodded. Yes, because this was the day you rose, the day they rose, and the day fear was broken. The people shouted once more, their voices carrying into the morning sky, freedom, freedom. The chains of silence were gone, and in their place, a new dawn had begun.